You've done some amazing deals over your time, and hence why you've become Property Investor of the Year award. But what's been your favourite deal?
How about yourself, Mike? How about what's been your
Good one. You seem to come across to vendors in a very good light. You seem to be able to strike really good and creative deals. And I'd love to know what you feel has been the key to that success. Welcome to the Property Business Accelerator podcast. I'm Mike Frisby, and I've been investing in property for almost 20 years. In my first year investing, I did some big creative deals and ended up with over £4 million worth of property. So I have been doing bigger deals from the word go, creatively financing them. I'm here today with Toby Spanier, Property Investor of the Year award winner in 2024. He too has done a lot of creative deals. So Toby, introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I'm Toby Spanier. I'm an ex-management consultant. I've been full-time in property for the last 2 years, and my first investment property I bought 7 years ago. So I'm still a relative newcomer to the space.
Fantastic. So what I want to do, I know you've done some amazing deals over your time, and hence why you've become Property Investor of the Year award. But what's been your favourite deal over this period of time? Property investor, and why?
My favourite deal was a property I bought just after COVID, in the height of the market. It was a 2-bed, 2 up, 2 down Victorian end of terrace. Nothing special about it. And the reason it's my favourite deal is because there were lots of different small little things that I did that just made the deal get better and better. So the first thing, I bought it at asking price. At this point, it was the market was super hot. The market just opened up again. Prices were zooming. And if I hadn't offered asking price, someone else would have bought it. It then turned out, I sent my builder in, and it turned out there were a few things that the vendor had hidden, such as the house is basically a little bit unstable, and the side gable wall needed to be taken down and rebuilt. And I got a quote from my builder for that. And that enabled me to renegotiate with the vendor to reduce the price. It was on for 120, so I agreed 110.20. I was happy to pay 120, but then when I found out there were things that they knew about but they hadn't disclosed, then I was happy to renegotiate, and we agreed £100,000. That was at a time when properties were going at 180 in that little terrace, so it was a good price. I needed to do the property up. I got a loan from the council for £40,000 to do the property up. It cost 47. So essentially, the loan was an interest-free loan, covered the cost of doing the works. It's one of those photos on Rightmove where you can't see the house because the front garden was just so overgrown. It obscured the entire house, and it was putting the whole street down by being the worst house in the street. But because it was structurally unsound, then I didn't have to pay stamp duty because it was the non-residential rate. Stamp duty because it's uninhabitable. I didn't have to pay council tax because there was major restructural works that were required. So I got all these additional benefits.
Yeah.
The property was unmortgageable. I was able to use a loan from my pension in order to buy the property in cash. And then within a year, I was able to refinance the property. It was valued at £205,000, so it paid all the money back. It made some profits. I did this with my wife. We won an award from it, the SAS Pension Investor of the Year. That was last year. It was a very simple deal, and most people wouldn't have bothered with it. But it was just these little things that made it better. And then ultimately, it ended up being the nicest looking house in the street, as opposed to the worst looking house. And there's just some personal pride in that. And then I was able to eventually give the property to the council to house a homeless family. So, being a force for good within the property world. I think those are the reasons why I really like that deal.
So what was the purchase price again?
It was, I agreed 120,000, but it was renegotiated to 100.
Okay, so if we do the quick maths on that, that's quite good, isn't it? If you spent like 47, no stamp, obviously there are some buy costs, but you're kind of in for 150.
Yeah.
You get it valued for over 200. You're cashing out at the end of that.
Exactly.
And so that's a really good good trick.
And is this down south where people say you can't do money in, money out deals? It's obviously not true because I've done it. And it wasn't, this is a property advertised on Rightmove. Anybody could have bought this property.
Yeah, and that really is, you hear a lot of people go, buy the worst property in the street and make it the best property in the street. Sounds like you did that and it's worked for you, which is great. But I think that's key, isn't it? You've kind of like, everyone else was not interested maybe, or maybe, I don't know whether the person was desperate or you understood a way to finance it. But what I also love about this deal, and probably why it could be one of your favorite deals, is really it wasn't, you got a little bit of advantage with stamp, a little bit of advantage with council tax, a little bit of advantage because you got a interest-free loan from the council. So you were pulling on lots of little things that just made this deal better and better and better and better. That meant that you could recycle all your cash out, go again, and you probably got a really handsome cash flow out of it as well. And it's probably nestled quite nicely in your portfolio now.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that I wouldn't mind my son to inherit because it's just a nice little cute house.
Yeah, it's a brilliant, and you won an award, which is probably another reason why it's one of your favorite deals. So,
how about yourself, Mike? How about what's been your deal?
Good one. I think one of my favorite deals was one of my first deals that I did because it was a bit nerve wracking at the time because it was the first time I kind of stepped up. I quite quickly stepped into £1 million deals, and it was kind of like just taking advantage of circumstances. I was quick to act. It was a deal that I came across. Someone was like offering out this deal, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And so I got hold of it, started talking to the vendor. It was just literally all it was a lead. It wasn't a proper negotiated deal. I had to negotiate it, but it was a block of flats. It was 8 flats, kind of West London way. And I negotiated well on it. The guy needed to sell quickly, so I had to act quickly. And I used kind of like a combination of techniques. And I think this is where my unconventional thinking comes in, my creativity comes in. But I think I could probably work my way through the deal more than others because there was 2 freeholds for these eight flats because it was kind of one that was basically originally, I guess, would have been 2 semi-detached houses. One had been converted into 2 flats, and then the other side had been extended into 6 flats. So I combined different creative finance techniques on the different things, and really recycled my money quickly through a lot of it, and utilized bridging, utilized so many different aspects that I've gone on to use again and again and again and again, and still work today. And I guess it was like I didn't. It was so early in my days of investing. I was just sort of, I just looked at it in any way, shape or form and go, can this go wrong? Can this go wrong? Is this? And I was like, surely just any way I looked at it, I felt comfortable with it. So I can't, because I bought the 2 different parts, I can't quite remember the total amount. I think I paid something 900 and something for it. And it was worth, I think, on day of purchase about 1.25 or something. I got the valuation on it, and then it cash flowed, and then also over time, this is where rents had gone up and up and up, and then it started to cash flow nicer and nicer and nicer. So it was just, I guess, why is it one of my favorite deals? It was because I was so new. Kind of my naivety got me into it in some ways, but also I worked my way through it. I did it. I kind of, followed my conviction, and it all worked out fine on that deal. And actually the person was delighted, and it was stressful as well, because I remember him being on the phone to me going, you said you were going to complete today, and I need the money. I'm going to lose this house, and and I'm like, oh my God, I'm phoning brokers and solicitors and go, why haven't we completed? I've got this guy on the phone calling me the whole time. I remember sitting in the car because I had to pull over and sort all of this out. And then we got it through, and I felt such a sense of relief. And he was happy. When I picked up the keys from him, he was happy as Larry because he rescued the situation. He'd obviously got some money out of it, which he was, could have lost. And, so it was a win-win scenario. And it kind of taught me a lot. And I was like, I hadn't even thought about it's got tenants in, and now I've got to start managing tenants. And I really didn't know what I was doing at that point. But he like, yeah, I've got all these tenancies. You need this, you need this, you need. And I actually learned a lot from him in terms of how to set up a tenancy and move someone in and all this kind of stuff, because he was just doing it as a matter of course and giving me a handover. And I hadn't even thought about that. I just thought about getting the deal.
No, I've learned a lot from retiring landlords that they're a mine of information. Just ask them how they manage the things as much as you learn stuff. I mean, interesting what you say. I think with these bigger deals, you are potentially taking on more risk, and then there could be more variation around price, and it could hurt you if you get it wrong. But I think in this case, you were saying, Churchill said, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. You have a plan, it's never going to go according to plan, things are going to go wrong. But if you thought about what you would do if this doesn't happen or that doesn't happen, what levers you would pull, then when things do go wrong or do vary from the plan A, you're not stressed about it. You can just deal with it. And I think that there was definitely some of that in your story. That kind of gives you the confidence to go for these bigger deals.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was like, just, I looked at it every which way. And I just thought, I can see a positive outcome in these different scenarios, and solving problems as I came along, pushing people, getting advice. And I learned so much through that deal, so much. And, that still holds me in brilliant stead, almost 20 years later. It still holds me in good stead, because those learnings, I still put those principles in place today, and help others to do the same thing.
So if I can ask you a different question, but related. I mean, often people say you learn not very much from success, you learn a lot more from failure. So can I ask you about your worst deal that you ever did, why it was such a bad deal, and what you learned as a result of it?
I think actually, the worst deal I probably did was probably my very first deal. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd been procrastinating so much about getting into property, and just didn't know how to do it, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to look for deals, didn't quite know what to do. There were no networking events at the time. Internet wasn't really there. I mean, like, you think about 20 years ago, it wasn't that you could just pop onto Google and just do things. It was a very different world. So it just took, just finding out information of how to property invest was very difficult. It wasn't easy. So I was just determined to get going. So I kind of, with youthful exuberance or novelty, went round property. There was the property investor show, I think it was. I think it could have been at Excel. It was a big thing. And in those days, there were lots of people selling deals at those things. I kind of so it was a sourcing agent, or kind of a sourcing company. I live in the south. I live in Surrey, and it was up in Leeds.
Could possibly go wrong.
What could possibly go wrong? And I thought I'd done some due diligence on the property. They were saying, yeah, you can buy it at a bit of a discount, and in those days you could get like a 5% gifted deposit. They were also like, oh, you can have it was a 90% or an 89%. So basically, I think it was an 89% mortgage and a 5% gifted deposit. And I think they also paid my stamp duty. So I'm like going, oh, it's hardly any money in. This is great. And my return on investment is going to be amazing. And they converted this property into it was a 5-bed student HMO. And I looked, and it was like quite close to the university. And I thought, well, that looks good. And I did go and visit the property. It looked okay. But what I hadn't really anticipated is there was kind of a no-go zone right close to the university, because it was, and they were trying to bring it up. I mean, they'd sold me this pot of they were trying to bring up the area. The problem is like, it takes a while. And they'd give me some guaranteed rent for the first year. So all bought it, and it was all going okay. And I thought, this is okay, isn't it? The trouble is they hadn't filled it. So the guaranteed rent ran out, and it was pretty much empty. And then they hadn't done it for the next year. And then I was struggling to rent it the whole time. And then it was like, oh my God, I've got this property that's not renting properly, and being so far away, it was difficult to get on top of it. And then I had an agent, and I didn't act quick enough and do my own thing quick enough, and all these kind of things. And they kept saying, and then I got a couple of people in there, and it's supposed to be a 5-bed. Then it worked out that the workmanship that they did was a bit more shoddy, and they'd converted the basement into a room, and that started to get damp, so I couldn't let that out. And then all of a sudden it was like I needed to get a license on it, and the licensing man came round, and there were all this work to do. So it was just sort of one nightmare after another. And I guess the biggest learning was like, although you kind of do, if you do a surface level of due diligence, if you don't know the area properly, you can come a cropper. And what appears good on paper, if you don't have the knowledge. And in actual fact, to my, to give myself a little bit of credit on all of this, the person who was the head of the company actually got convicted of fraud and went to jail and all of this kind of stuff. I think he bribed the developers. And really, the main thing though, when you say property is very forgiving, the biggest thing here was the fact that I totally overpaid for this property. If you looked at other HMOs in decent areas, it was comparable, but they bought it for next to nothing, done the work on it, and then was almost adding, 50% again. Yeah. So they were like almost doubling the plot. And why were they giving you a dead round to? And I remember when I came back and looked at the valuation report, and I think they'd been bribing these but all of the comparables were other properties that they'd sold doing the same thing. So there was evidence in some ways, but it was, it was like, well, they'd obviously bought this for next to nothing, which I didn't quite realize. They'd then like inflated the price and inflated the price again, at all these other ones to try and make it look good. But essentially they weren't worth, when it came to like, it lost, a bit like a new car. You take it out the showroom, it loses value. This thing, just because they were selling it with this particular mechanism and in the show, it had a yield, but no other investor wanted it because you couldn't fill it. So it was like halved in price. So eventually the story, to complete the story, eventually I negotiated, credit crunch happened and all of this lot, and the lender wanted I think someone bought the book of the lender and they wanted to exit and offered me a deal to get out of it, which I took. So in actual fact, they took a haircut on the mortgage, but they'd probably paid, I don't know, let's say the mortgage was 100 grand. They'd probably paid 10, 20p in the pound for the mortgage. So they were happy if I could redeem it to say 50p in the pound, because then they'd be making some money on that. So I think that's probably what happened in the end. So it all came okay in the end, but it was like a bit of a nightmare, pulled my attention, and I learned some valuable lessons of do your due diligence. If you're going to invest away from home, and know your area properly and have your infrastructure up there, and I should have invested more time and energy in sorting it all out quicker. So those are probably my key learnings. So what about you? Now we're on this subject. What about you?
Similar story, but I don't think as painful as your story. And again, it was my first property. It was a 3-bed, semi-detached property that I wanted to convert into, well, I had a strategy of HMO, so I was looking for cheap properties in my area to convert to HMO. This was interesting. It was an online agent, no experience in the area, and rather than having a price, they put offers over 120, which was interesting because I looked at comparable properties, and I thought the property should have been about 145 because it was different to all the other properties in the street. On the other side of the road, they were terraced and they were 2-bed. This was a 3-bed, semi-detached. It was on the corner, so it was a bigger plot, a much bigger garden, had the potential for off-road parking. So I actually worked out the comparators should have been different, and that was missed by the agent. So I thought, well, it's worth 145. I was keen to get in. It was my first property, and I just went in with 138 because that was less than what I thought it was worth. And my first mistake was I overpaid for it because it may have been worth 145, but the agent had undervalued it. The vendor was downsizing and wanting to buy a motorhome, so just needed an amount of money, but not a huge amount of money. And so I probably put 18 grand more on the table than I needed to. So that was mistake number one. Mistake number two was this was a really good house with a really good potential. 1930s, well designed, really big garden, which is unusual in the area, and enough space for car parking beside the house because it was on this sort of a bend in a road. So it was just a bigger plot. And really, it lent itself to being a really nice family home. But my strategy was HMO, so I was just going to force that strategy on the building. And in order to get the 5 rooms, we had to basically remove most of the walls upstairs. You've got little postage stamp areas so that you complied with the minimum space standard for the room at the front, which was a smaller room. There's a lovely room at the back, but then that became pretty useless because we'd taken chunks out of it. I ripped out a bathroom. It was perfectly adequate in order to put another bathroom in. So that was a waste. The kitchen was fine, but it all got ripped out back to brick. So I overspent on the property. I then overspent on converting it to HMO. It wasn't the right strategy for the property. When I came to sell, I sold it for 196 grand. So I had made money on top of the 30 grand refurb. But if I hadn't done any of the works at all, it would have sold for the same price, perhaps a bit more.
Perhaps more.
Perhaps I would have made a bit more money if I just put a patio door in to the rear sort of living space, and just made a better connection with the garden. So I could have just painted it all white, put new carpets in, and let it out. And I would have made more money than this. The refurb, first time I was doing it, took 5 or 6 months to do. I was 5 or 6 months not getting money in. Then it took a long time to get the rooms all let. Then we had problems with, damping this room, like you say, wasn't able to let this room out, etc., etc. It just was the wrong strategy for the property. And the thing I most disappoints me was it was a nice house, and I feel I ruined it because the person who bought it obviously has kept it as an HMO. But it was just a really nice house, and I should just respect it. We talk about having integrity with people. I also feel very strongly you should have integrity with buildings. And the right thing for this building was to not convert it into an HMO. That wasn't the right use of the asset. There were other properties in the area that were like 50s, 60s, 70s ugly buildings. They were right to refresh and modernize as HMOs, but not that one. So that's something I'm actually embarrassed about. To say I made money, I got out of it, but I felt I'd done the wrong thing to the property.
I like that phrase, like integrity to the property, because I'd kind of, without realizing it, I probably felt the same. And I do think a lot of people are like, you're talking about, well, this is probably the worst deal. I think there's loads of people who invest too much, or do the wrong thing to a property. I don't think that's uncommon at all. I think maybe sometimes people underestimate the costs, or they do too much for what the end value is. I think some people, especially in my social housing stock, I think some people are quite surprised when I say this is, no, I've actually redecorated this. They're like, what? Oh my God, I've just spent way too much money on my property. It's like, because this will let, whether it's this or this, it's still nice and it all works. And actually I'm making, giving, the time to, quite often it's people who've been homeless go into something like that. But if I do it up there, it's not worth it. The maths don't work, so it doesn't work. So, and I have seen people do, invest so much that their property is worth less than the amount of money they've invested into the property. And I'm just going, I just don't understand that. How come you don't let people go, well, it's a really nice HMO now? And also, I think on HMOs, and you do this work or whatever, if you end up with small rooms, it's much harder to let and it's much more of a nightmare to manage. If you've got bigger rooms, it's easier to manage. But also people go so far with HMOs. And I'm thinking, it looks lovely and trendy now, but HMOs are hard wearing. You're going to do the same thing in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
And invest all that money again? If you look at restaurants or cafes, they have to completely reinvent themselves sort of every 5 years to stay fresh and up and modern. And I think some people are heading that way with HMOs and don't realize it. They're thinking, now I've done it. It's going to be great, totally great forever.
I remember my worst day with my first portfolio was 2 years in. I went back into one of the properties and it was already an HMO when I bought it. It was a light refurb. And I walked in and everything I'd spent on it was just trashed. The carpet had gone, the walls were all scuffed. It was a small property, so that's why they all got scuffed. There was 5 households living there. And it wasn't the tenants' fault. They were just using the property, but it's just a lot of footwork. And I walked in and felt that I was some kind of rogue landlord because it just looked so terrible. But it was all fresh when I started. And that's the other thing people forget, that you need to constantly refurbish, or mini refurbish these properties to retain the marketability of them in the marketplace.
And I see, this is what I see, is like a lot of people go into it, they do this lovely property, and then and if you watch them over time, their refurbs change. Yes. And what it is they focus far more on longevity than on design and frills and making it look amazing and everything. Yes, it still looks good. But it's often about hard wearing. Okay, let's think about the flooring. What kind of flooring should we have in here? So it's all about durability, making, colors that work for durability. If you have white in the hallway, it's going to get scuffed. People bring bikes in. It just, as you say, it's just normal wear and tear of that many units in there. So let's move on. I mean, obviously we've had a period of sort of a little bit about, not necessarily negativity, but a lot of learnings and a lot of things that, you have to be raw with property. And I think a lot of people just always talk about the rosy side. So it's important to, and I think most people have been through an experience of, if you're of a certain size, there's always a lemon somewhere that you've managed to buy or do something with. But let's go back onto the more positive element of this all. And one of the things that I think that has made you successful and scale up quickly is you seem to come across to vendors in a very good light. You seem to be able to strike really good and creative deals. And I'd love to know what you feel is being the key to that success, because I think other people could come in and not necessarily understand the nuances of what you've done to actually achieve these deals, and why other people try and do them and they're not successful. So what do you think has been the key to that?
So I think the first thing I would say is people tend to come to property as a second career. They tend to be successful in some other corporate entity as an employee. They do well, they make some additional cash, and then they think, what am I going to do to invest this money? I know, why don't I start investing in property? And when they start the property thing, sometimes they go, I actually like the property thing, I want to expand into it, I want to do it full time. And they go, my old job, I'm bored of it, I don't want to do it anymore, I've been doing it 20 years, I wanted something totally different. And they forget that there are skills that they've developed in that career that are really useful. They are things that are easy to them, that they do naturally, that are not easy to other people. And I think the first thing is to recognize what are those skills that are transferable into the property world. And then if you use those skills, you already have a source of competitive advantage over the rest of the marketplace, because they're not going to have that kind of skill set. For me, I had 25 years as a management consultant. It was all around, well, two things. Firstly, building relationships with clients, building relationships with people internally. So coming across as very professional, and understanding their perspective and understand what the real exam question is. And then the second part is how to answer that exam question, thinking creatively of different ways to achieve the outcome the client wants. Might not be in the way that they expected, but the most important thing is, what's the outcome? Not what they asked us to do, but why do they ask us to do that thing? What was the larger thing they're trying to achieve? And I think that's the transferable skill set that I've been able to take across. And I'd advise anyone who is going to property as a second career to just reflect, what have they done that they have found easy, that other people go, oh, it's amazing you can do X. And they'll go, oh, it's not that amazing. It is. Just because it's easy to them doesn't mean it's not valuable to someone else. So I think that's the first thing. Then the second thing is that I've done is, in property, I was always taught that I had to go low price, you make money on the day you buy. And that has been interpreted that you should always look at the asking price and then take a percentage off, be it 25% or 10% or 20%, whatever the number is. And I think what I've done is look at the property and go, well, what's it really worth to me? And what could it be worth once I've applied my strategy to it? Therefore, what kind of number can I live with? And if it's actually reasonably priced, then perhaps the asking price is okay. And I bought a lot of properties at asking price, which had turned out to be a good deal, because that gets the vendor to go, yeah, happy to do a deal with you. And then what I've done is I've negotiated on terms and on price. But the key thing is trying to understand the vendor's perspective. And this is what is ignored in property training. The vendor doesn't matter. It's a transaction. You're never going to do the transaction again. You don't need to care about the vendor. They just need to accept your price. If they don't, then don't change your price. Just keep phoning up until eventually they accept. Some vendors are never going to accept. There is a number that they need to achieve. So what I've done well is understood their perspective. So on the largest deal I've done, the 24 flats, I realized the guy wanted to retire, but he didn't want to make all his staff redundant because he'd been successful in his career. They'd worked loyally for him for 15 years, exemplary employees. He didn't want to have that conversation of, I'm retiring, so you've now lost your job. So I realized a very simple solution. I offered to hire his staff, and it made sense to me because they knew how to run the block. I knew they were trustworthy because this guy had 100 properties, and one of them, her job was managing his bank accounts and paying everybody. So I knew she wasn't going to run off with the money. And that changed the whole relationship. When I said that, I only found out afterwards he changed his perception of me, and he became more willing to do a deal. We ended up with a very creative deal that worked for both of us, with me getting a 10-year delay completion. Then another deal I did back in May. The guy was retiring and he had a problem, and all retiring landlords have a problem. They sell assets, they make a profit, they pay their tax, and then they've got this heap of money sitting in the bank account. What are they going to do with it? They know property, but now they have exited property. So what they're going to invest it in, and what can they invest it in that's secure? And the solution, so the problem was the guy needed to warehouse the money somewhere, and he could get 4% or 5% here, or perhaps 6%. But where's the security in that? He was a property investor. He understood property. So the solution was, I borrowed all the money to purchase the property, or 99% from him. I gave him the first charge. He was then happy. He's now got a secure revenue stream for a number of years. He knows exactly how much money he's going to be getting because it's a guaranteed amount of money. It's a good interest rate for him, for his expectations. I think it works at around 8%, which, actually is quite cheap for me when I look at all the additional costs of getting into a deal and getting out of a deal. He's got this first child security. He's happy. So it's really understanding his perspective of what he was going to do with the money. But I was able to come up with a different way to structure the deal that worked for me and worked for him.
Yeah, I think you made some really good points here. It's obviously the win-win that we just finished on there. But I think taking those skills that you learned in your corporate world into property investing, I find so many investors, as you say, they're desperate to get out. And they want another income or another income stream, leave their corporate world. They've eventually got fed up of it. It's just too much. But they then and I think I was guilty of this a little bit at the beginning, and which is why I've instigated the methodologies I have into my business and the property business operating system. But it was like you break free and then you go, right, throw everything out with the bathwater, baby out with the bathwater, as they say. You throw everything out. You want the freedom. You want to do this. You want to do that. You don't take the most useful things you've learned and actually the things that add and give you an advantage. It's so true. I think, if I go on to, what have I done with vendors and what have I worked, I agree with you. Just listen to what they say. Listen to what they say and what they're really meaning and what they really want. And often price isn't the key thing. I did a lot of direct to vendor stuff. I mean, I didn't buy anything through an estate agent for years. It was, I did a lot of direct to vendor stuff. I mean, life's changed since then, but, again, it's still a lot. You want to it's not as though you're trying to cut out the estate agent, but getting to talk to the vendor directly is critical. Understand, because you'll never get that in the same way and build that rapport and relationship if you always do it through an estate agent. So once you've got estate agents on board and talking directly to vendors, I think it is about finding that win-win ground. And we were talking on another podcast around finding those win-wins, but you were talking about how you make 3 offers. I think that's also good. I often go normally 2, either or. This is what we can do today. It's this cash price. If you want me to buy it outright, then you walk off. Whereas if you give me time, this is what I can do. And quite often that is more appealing. And especially they've got a price in mind. Sometimes it's it also comes with certainty and those kind of things, but it's about listening, sitting there, not trying to be the big whoozy, I'm a big property investor. Just sit and listen, build that trust, build that rapport, solve their problems, find a solution to those problems. And, something that I was taught early on, it's more about the vendor than it is about the property itself.
Totally.
The deals will come from the vendor. So find the vendors. I mean, they often say it's the 4 Ds, which I'm trying to remember, but divorce, debt, death. I'm trying to remember what distress, maybe distress or something. Yeah, but like you solve something there. Health, the health is often a thing as well. And you can get these deals done, which I think we're both over time have
Yes, I think I've property educators say the vendors doesn't matter, the vendor's the enemy, and I've always viewed the vendor as being a business partner, or the vendor is my boss. If I'm vendor financing, I'm borrowing money from that person, I'm making money to give to that person. They're now my boss. So, I deal with them in a different kind of way. And I think that different sort of attitude is really what sort of underpins getting to an answer that you're happy with.
I think it's also negotiating. I talk to, as I talk to people who go through the Property Business Accelerator program and very much listen, very much find out what they want. But also, when you negotiate, you can create win-win scenarios, and that's what you're aiming for. You're not aiming to bash them. You also don't need a discount sometimes because you get other things. And I think people don't think like that. They just think of pure like 20% off. I mean, again, I've seen so many investors. It's like, 20% off. They literally just come in and it's all about numbers of offers, and there's 20%, or 25%, isn't it? Or 30%, or they have a figure and everything's off this, or off this. One, I think you really annoy the estate agents if you're going to go around doing that whole time, because nothing's going to happen. But it's about getting that win-win. And when you negotiate, take something that's important to you and get that condition or whatever that is, but doesn't mean anything to them. Isn't so hard for them to give, but it's important to you. So always negotiate. So if they want more money, which sometimes it is, but always take something back. And quite often that's time. Could be the mechanism of the way you're buying it. Could be all sorts of things, but always get something back in a negotiation. Don't give away anything for free. But it can still be win-win, because it could be significant to you, but it's probably incidental to them, and it doesn't make a two hoots, but it's really important to you, and that's why you can get the deal over the line. So understand that criteria, build that rapport, and get an agreement, and then do what you say and communicate while you're going through the process. And I think if you do that, you either do a lot of deals, and I know you have. And I love one of the little phrases you've always used when we were having our group sessions. It was like the cup of tea method.
Yes, have a cup of tea and just get to know the vendor and what's important to the vendor. And then you'll work out things that you can offer that the vendor's going to like.
Yeah, and they don't even know that that's what they're doing. They just chat. And I think that's the key. You know why you're there. They don't. They just think you're just having a nice chat with them. And most people like talking about themselves. So sit and listen, shut up, ask a question, shut up, and let them talk, and let them talk more, and keep silent. They try and, you have to obviously build your credibility amongst all of that. I would praise them. I would build the credibility, build your reputation. I think also one of your deals, did you get someone to talk to someone else or something?
Yeah, so get vendors to speak to each other.
Yeah, which I think,
as they tend to get on with each other, and just by getting on with each other, it kind of helps me.
Yeah, because that's the third party. As soon as you get third party, I think I've done it with you, haven't I? With sometimes when clients like going, I say to speak to Toby, you can see what Toby's done. So it does work, that sort of that third party. So build your, and that's building your brand, and you start to build a brand and build, you become known in the area of doing deals and getting stuff done and doing as you say. And I think that is always critical in business and life, isn't it? Do what you say. Can't go too far wrong, but just genuinely look for those win-win scenarios, and build that rapport. So yeah, I think those are some good takeaways out of today. Well, thank you very much, Toby, for coming along here today. It's been fascinating talking to you forever. I think the gems that you came out with, again, of use the skills you already have, and just listen and win-win. There's many deals. And I love the favourite deal as well, because there was always lots of, I always think Toby loves to know all these little niches of little things that add up to something. So yeah, thank you for coming along today, and my pleasure. It's been a pleasure working with you for all this time.